At DDI, we turn data-driven insights into dynamic leadership development, unlocking potential, sparking growth, driving performance, because better leaders create a better future.
Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Develop Leaders at the Speed of Business. A few housekeeping items before we begin. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive the link to watch on demand later today. Today's slides can be found in the resources section of your console. Feel free to use the chat to share your thoughts throughout the presentation. And for presenter questions, please use the Q&A panel. We will do our best to get to them at the end of our session. And now let's welcome in today's presenter, Verity Creedy, DDI's Chief Product Officer. Welcome, Verity.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for spending part of your day with us for today's webinar, which is all about developing leaders at the speed of business. So I've spent much of my career working with organizations that are trying to answer a kind of deceptively simple question, which is, how do we prepare leaders for a future that keeps changing faster than our leadership development programs? What I've really learned is that leadership development has never been more important, and yet many organizations are investing more than ever, but struggling at the same time to build the capability they need. So spending more money, spending more time, but not getting the results. And that's what we're going to really explore today. Why the gap's widening, why traditional approaches are struggling to keep pace, and what organizations are doing differently to accelerate leadership readiness at scale. Before we dive in, I'm Verity, so I'm Chief Product Officer at DDI. I'm delighted that you've joined us for what I hope is going to be a really kind of practical and thought-provoking conversation. And I do think of it as a conversation. I'm going to keep my eye on the chat and look forward to hearing any questions or comments that people have got in there. So a few years ago, leadership development was largely really about preparing leaders for their next role. Today, many leaders are trying to navigate AI. Yes, I know, I made it about, 2 minutes through the webinar before I mentioned AI. Sorry, it was inevitable. But yes, leaders are trying to navigate AI, constant change, talent shortages, hybrid work or return to work, increasing expectations all at the same time. The challenge isn't that organizations don't care about leadership development. I know that's not true. You all wouldn't be here if that was the case. The challenge is that the environment is changing faster than many of our development systems were really designed to handle. Before we dive in, I want to share a bit of a sneak peek into some new data that DDI is going to be publishing probably early next year. It comes from our Global Leadership Forecast. If you're interested in the Global Leadership Forecast, there's that Handouts tab. And in that Handouts tab, you're going to see in there some information with regards to the Global Leadership Forecast. But it is the longest and the largest global forecast or research into leadership. And the data is telling us a concerning story. 1 in 3 executives say that navigating uncertainty will be their biggest business challenge over the next 3 years, 1 in 3. At the same time, only 1 in 5 leaders feel that they learn about problems early enough to be able to respond effectively. In other words, leaders are being asked to navigate things that often executives might be able to see, but they can't see. And it's really taking its toll. Nearly 70% of managers tell us that they feel really overwhelmed by the lack of information. But it's the lack of clarity on what actions that will actually make them more effective that's also driving a lot of that overwhelm. The result is that leaders are spending more time reacting than leading. So we're seeing things like firefighting replacing prioritization. We're seeing coaching, especially proactive coaching, getting pushed aside. and the capability building is often taking a back seat. So give me a quick emoji, maybe a quick, like a heart emoji. If some of that's resonating with you, you're seeing your leaders firefighting rather than that kind of proactive prioritizing and that really thoughtful coaching. Yeah, I'm seeing a few of those coming in. Thank you. That's the leadership gap we're seeing emerge. And it's exactly why traditional leadership development is really struggling to keep pace. So what does all of this mean for you as L&D and talent leaders? I referenced this in my recent ATD conference summary. Many of you might have been at ATD or you might have seen it on LinkedIn, but for years, many leadership development programs were designed for these very stable environments. Leaders learned skills, they practiced them, they applied them over time. But today's reality is really different. The challenge isn't about preparing leaders for stability. It's about preparing them, not just for change, but kind of constant volatility. At the same time, lots of organizations are investing heavily in new technologies in AI. But despite all the excitement, the impact, as I said, is remaining really quite scarce. The technology is advancing rapidly, and yet leaders are still lacking some of that judgment, lacking some of that adaptability, lacking some of that confidence to take those tools and really translate it into real business results. And that's creating a new level, in my opinion, a new level of scrutiny for leadership development. I would imagine a lot of you are being asked to provide very curated, personalized development at scale. You're being asked to demonstrate clear business impact. You're being asked to keep development very relevant in this rapidly changing environment. And I'll also guess that, and I'm seeing some thumbs up in the chat, I can also guess that a lot of you are being asked to do all of that with often fewer resources on your teams. So in short, no pressure, but the expectations for leadership development really, I don't think have ever been higher. And the challenge isn't whether leadership development matters, it's whether our approaches can keep pace with the realities that the leaders are facing. And this is really the such critical piece, is delivering the impact that businesses really need. So we've talked a bit about the pressures facing leaders and the increasing demands being placed on leadership development teams. But I'm really curious about your perspective. Across the organizations that you work in, where do you see traditional leadership development falling shortest today? Is it the programs are too generic? Is it too slow, like to try and keep that with that pace of change? Are you finding it difficult to scale, hard to measure? Maybe it's disconnected from the business. Whatever it is, you want to take a moment to do a vote. And if your answer isn't one of those answers on the screen, then I'd love it if you can just go ahead and throw it into the chat. It would be great. It'd be great to see that. So Kim, can we go to that poll?
We sure can. I'm going to flash it across your screen. Results are coming in, Bea.
They sure are. Let me give a couple of minutes as you're all responding. People don't understand 70, 20, 10. They spend all their time on the 10 and not figuring out how to scale the 70. Great comment in the chat. Okay, fantastic. Let's have a look at what we've got here. A lot of people finding it hard to measure. The generic or the disconnected from business priorities, difficult to scale. So, okay, we've got a pretty thorough mix across the hundreds of you who are responding here. I think, yeah, it does show that really it's a lot of these things that are very much at play. I think what we can see then, as we return to the slides, while the methods may need to evolve, I think what we can see is that the destination remains the same. So we need leaders who can deliver results today and who are ready for what's next. But the real question is, if that goal hasn't changed, then what do we need to change about the way in which we develop them? One of the biggest challenges facing L&D, and it's one of the things that scored highest, is around that measurement piece. It does bother me that it feels like L&D today and leadership development is often seen as a cost center rather than a real growth driver. But when we look at the data, the impact of leadership quality really shows up everywhere that the business cares about. Shows up in revenue growth, shows up in profitability, shows up in productivity, engagement, retention. I'm seeing lots of the hands up. Exactly. The overall organizational health. So let's dive into that and look at that in a bit more detail. Let's start with the average results of those who are assessed by their managers as being poor performers or poor leaders. You can see some of the data there. Now, the difference between a poor leader and an average leader is really meaningful. You can see a lot of those differences on there, and around the overall organizational health and around some of the profitability. But to me, the difference between an average leader and a truly effective leader, I think, can be transformational to a business. That's why leadership development matters so much. We're not trying to create perfect leaders. We're just trying to close that gap between where leaders are today and where we need them for those business results. Because every time we help a leader to become more effective, of course, we're changing an individual, we're making leadership easier for them, but we are also improving team performance, we're accelerating execution, we're strengthening retention, we're driving an organization's ability to really adapt and grow. So the organizations that win in the future won't necessarily be the ones with the best strategy, but they will be the ones that have the leadership capability who can adjust and move to the strategic changes around them. A VP of executive development recently summed up the challenge perfectly to me. He said, how do I close the gap from average to good then? How do I close it from average and do it really quickly? I think that is the $1 million question. They're looking for that faster impact. And the good news is we know what works. That's what this is about. I'm not going to have a whole webinar just building the pain of this. We're going to dive into what are some of the ways that we can really address it. So, so I'm seeing some great comments already in the chat around the volatility, around the lack of application, around small organizations not being able to customize. These are fantastic. These are the sorts of comments that make this a real discussion. Please keep going. And I agree, Mark. Yeah, rather than somebody's just called out, rather than saying, from average to good, let's go to great. So high impact leadership development, it isn't about more content. It isn't necessarily about more programs, but it is about creating experiences that are relevant, personalized, immersive, human, and trusted. These are the 5 essentials that help turn leadership potential into business impact, and they're going to help you all really shine in your roles. These don't just deliver learning or deliver training. These are the things that really close those performance gaps. And we're going to spend some time diving into each of those. And as I say, some of you are asking some great questions. We're going to promote some of those questions to our Q&A panel and make sure that we address those later. Keep those questions coming. So I'll dive into each. And I'm also going to share along the way a little bit about how customers are designing their leadership development experiences and bring some real life examples in. So let's start with relevance. One of the biggest reasons that leadership development falls short is that it's often designed around very generic competencies or, just a rather generic leadership model, as opposed to really honing in on the very specific business needs. High impact development starts with the end in mind. What business outcomes are you trying to influence? Are you an organization that's focused on growth or focused on just sustaining profit? Have you got problems with retention? Have you got problems with accelerating go-to-market? Issues with innovation and product efficiency? These are some of the questions that I would encourage all of you to get really clear on and challenge it as well, because sometimes an organization that I worked with recently, she said, I know what our challenges are. I've seen them in, our CEO has talked about them. I'm really aware. We've seen them in board reports. But when she actually got under the surface, she actually got to quite a different set of problems that she thought, if I can really address those, actually, it is going to have a greater swing. So focusing on really the end in mind, and then focusing the investment on where matters most. So that doesn't mean that all leaders, all roles will have the greatest impact, you're going to want to focus on where who touches the problem closest, and ensure that rather than relying on assumptions, you're trying to get really good objective data about those individuals. You want to identify the specific performance gaps and then target the development accordingly. So the result is that development isn't then just interesting or engaging, but it's also really tightly connected to the outcomes that the business most cares about. So, for example, one customer we were working with a couple of weeks ago, they were going to do something around communication, but they actually ended up framing their whole program more around the concept of transformation, and especially about driving transformation through culture. Now, of course, a big part of driving transformation through culture is about communication, building trust, things like that. But it felt so much more relevant by keeping it associated with this transformation piece. So how do you know where to really focus your development? As I said, the answer is data. Too often, leadership development is built around what we think leaders need or what we are told that leaders need. But high impact organizations are using objective assessment data to really understand where the biggest capability gaps actually exist. Here's an example. We can see competency strengths and weaknesses across a leadership population. So rather than trying to develop everything, you can see right now where we can identify the few capabilities that are going to have the greatest impact on performance and prioritize those. As I say, not every skill gap is equally important. And yeah, this sort of data, I mean, this is data that you could look at for frontline leaders, or I see in the chat, mid-level leaders. We often see that mid-level leaders get ignored, and that's really hard because they are really that sandwich between the strategy and the execution. So yeah, as you're thinking about where should I be starting, sometimes challenge those assumptions. Yes, we were going to do a frontline program, but actually do we need to focus on the mid-level because they're closest to the problem? So this sort of data gives you really good objective understanding of where you've got your biggest challenges and those biggest performance gaps. But I also love it when you can go into more detail, more granular detail. So this is from our leadership skills insights assessment. Some of you may already use them, and these do exactly that. They help you understand at that more macro competency level, but then you can go a level deeper. So take delegation and empowerment, for example. Knowing it's a development priority is really useful, but it really isn't enough. To create that meaningful behavior change, you need clarity on the specific actions you need your leaders doing differently to drive the success. So when we drill down into the competency, we can see the individual, really the actions, the everyday actions that sit underneath it. Some are already strengths, while others might represent the biggest opportunities for growth. So rather than having whole sessions focused on delegating more, instead you can pinpoint exactly where to focus, whether that's creating opportunities to share responsibility or involving others in decisions or providing support without taking that ownership. So this is where that development becomes much, much more targeted, much, much more actionable and more effective. And I've seen in the chat a lot of you calling out time. Leaders are time starved. So rather than going through all of delegation, you could focus the time on the behaviors that you know are most relevant for moving the needle in the business. And once you understand the specific behaviors each leader needs to strengthen, you can move beyond one size fits all development and start creating really personalized experiences, which is what we're going to be starting to look at now. That's the second of these essentials. This is, in my opinion, where I think leaders have the highest expectations of us. So, of course, we've got stakeholders in the business that we need to work to. But part of those stakeholders are the leaders themselves who go through the programs. And it can unintentionally fall short. If you think about it, we put 100 leaders through the exact same program, but they all walk in with very different strengths, different challenges, different motivations, different career aspirations. And I think what we sometimes miss is how personal some of that behavior change journey is, because every leader comes in with these really unique experiences and unique backgrounds. I was speaking with a leadership development leader recently who told me they had excellent participation rates and really good satisfaction scores for their sort of flagship leadership program. But when they looked at the impact, it was really inconsistent. They could see that some leaders were learning skills that they'd already mastered, and others weren't getting the support in the areas that really would make the biggest difference to their performance. The most effective development helps leaders understand not only what they should develop, but why it matters to them and how strengthening that capability is going to help them to be more successful. So that's why high impact organizations are really personalizing both the development journey and the learning experience, so that leaders can see that really clear connection between development and their own success. One approach that we're seeing working really well is starting with an example of what personalization can look like in practice. And this is a brief diagnostic experience. We've got a quick short video that we are going to play for you, so I can walk you through it and show you what it looks like. Okay. So in LeaderLab, you can see how we're asking them questions, just a few questions. It's a platform for leaders as they first engage in their experiences. But can you see these different levels of questions that they're able to ask? They're able to talk about what's important to them. So not what they're being mandated to do, but really the skills that are most critical to them. And having shared those skills, they can then prioritize them as well. Having done that prioritization, they can then type in specifically what they're trying to work on in their career goals. Two things happen after that. Firstly, we're trying to make the data much more transparent to the leader themselves, so it feels like they're going on the journey, they're driving their development. And secondly, we're then tailoring any recommendations to them. So I'm not saying that you can't do those broad cohort programs. It's an efficiency, it's a scalability. But what can you offer them outside of those programs that reinforce those skills, but also really take them to that level of unique personalization? That's great. So you can see that really clearly. So that's just one example of what that can look like. It's a simple shift, but I think quite an important one. My second example is using AI to personalize development in the flow of work. Maybe give me an emoji, pick your emoji, I don't mind which one. If any of you are trying out AI coaches, because one of the challenges with traditional leadership development is that leaders often leave a cohort experience feeling inspired, but then they don't really know how to apply those when a real situation arises. And I think AI coaches can be really helpful in this situation. Leaders can bring their real challenges that they're facing. They can get personalized guidance in that moment. They can prepare for difficult conversations, think through leadership scenarios. And it's in a really safe space to try some of that out. In our AI coach, they can even practice role playing and get some feedback on how well they're preparing for a tough conversation. So, for example, let's go to a tricky one. A leader might be preparing to give difficult feedback to a high performer. They know they're going to take the feedback quite personally, that they might respond very emotionally to that, but they also want to make sure that they hear the feedback. So they're going to want to practice that in advance. So it isn't just, as I say, the power of the AI, it's the power of the personalization of them bringing their challenges, but getting coaching that reinforces whatever that it was that they had experienced in their cohort learning as well. So it's tailored to their situation, but keeps building on that really great backbone. So relevance helps us focus on the right skills, the right stuff. Personalization helps leaders focus then on leveraging their development in the right way. But neither necessarily guarantees behavior change. Leaders don't become effective simply by consuming content, even if it's highly personalized and relevant. I really feel like leadership is what I would describe as a contact sport. It's about through application, reflection, practice. And that's why, this immersive piece is so important. If you think about the leadership moments that matter, coaching, navigating conflict, they're not just knowledge challenges, they're really behavioral opportunities. So the most effective development experience make that very immersive. They give leaders the opportunity to really live those sorts of scenarios. They create the opportunities, those development programs create the opportunities to solve problems and try navigating things. So what can that look like at scale? This can be hard. Let me give you an example from some of the work that we've been doing, especially with manufacturing organizations. We recently introduced performance accelerators. It's experiences that you can do in the classroom, but there's AI-enabled practice experiences built in to help leaders really build these critical skills through these very immersive scenarios. So we're going to watch a quick video of what they look like. But what will happen is during a facilitated session, you'll often hear those sorts of activities of what would you say, what would you do? And it can be that they're quite general scenarios, but we've wanted to try and increase that immersiveness by cohorts working on shared scenarios. So maybe there's a concern around safety and that all of the leaders in that room face that same challenge around still driving performance, driving production, but not at the expense of safety. So they can all then work on this shared scenario. So you go ahead, you type a bit of information, as you can see right now, into the scenario. And then once you've gone ahead and done that, it then builds for you a simulation that you're going to work through together. So it's taken that information, it's anonymized it, it's given that the visual to accompany it, and you then start practicing. You can play the audio and sort of imagine what it's like having this conversation with this person. So, as I say, a very immersive way of doing that with others. What you're also doing, though, of course, is setting up how they can go ahead and use this same scenario generator when they leave the classroom, but that's still going to be available to them to use their own personal scenarios in there. Cool. I'm getting some great reactions to that. Yeah, we're looking forward to sharing more on that soon. So, as I say, the goal isn't about just completing the development. It's about really helping them work through those very true scenarios. And we talked about technology a lot, and technologies like AI are making lots of things more scalable. They are allowing things to be more personalized. But the interesting thing is that the more AI changes work, the more that the human leadership we're seeing really matters. You read it everywhere. AI is only as impactful as the people who are using it, and introducing it as a process is only as effective as those who are leading the change. What AI can't do is replace judgment, and the judgment that's required when people and emotions and business decisions all really intersect. So that's why for us, the fourth essential really is about human. High impact development helps leaders to develop a deeper understanding of who they are, of how they show up, and also the impact that they're having on others. To me, it builds on all those skills. It's like a real multiplier. Skills like coaching, like empathy, self-awareness, influencing. It recognizes that leadership development doesn't happen in isolation. It's a very human endeavor. So before we move on, a quick audience check. Use the chat feature if you're familiar with DDI's model for better leadership. If these 5 key principles look familiar to you, drop a yes in the chat. That helps me understand you as an audience and meet you where you are. These principles have been around for nearly 55 years of DDI's history, where we've been focusing. I can see lots of yeses coming in here. Fantastic. Okay, so lots of people recognizing those. So yeah, 55 years. These have really truly stood the test of time. These have taken us through the pandemic. These are taking us into this world, this new frontier with AI. Esteem, empathy, involvement, sharing, and support. None of them about technology. None of them about process. These are fundamentally really human. In fact, if you think about challenges that leaders are facing today, So things like engaging employees, building trust, and trust is so critical, especially with AI at the moment, navigating change. These principles matter even more and not less. As AI becomes more capable, as I say, the leaders, we need to become just more capable with building trust and fostering belonging. So the human side of leadership isn't less important. It really is becoming a huge differentiator. I'm seeing some of you call out that you're DDI instructors. So yeah, you're probably reciting those 5 key principles in your sleep. We talked about why human leadership matters more than ever, but the question I'd love you to consider is, how confident are you that your leaders are consistently demonstrating those skills? So we're going to do another poll. So quick pulse check. Looking across your leadership population, which statement do you think best reflects your reality today? Are these skills demonstrated by the majority of your leaders? Is it closer to 50-50? Can you think of a handful of leaders who consistently role model them, or maybe some of those are new concepts? Let's take a moment to vote, and some of that voting is going to come up on the screen. Yeah, okay. Okay, look at that. Wow, there's some pretty clear messaging there. We're looking at somewhere between a few to maybe 50-50. But only 9% saying they think the majority have the skills. And I had a great debate with a leader in a workshop recently. And the debate we got to, or the point we really primarily got to, was him saying, well, we know we need to do this. We know we need to do this. What he basically was kindly and politely trying to say to me was, Verity, those are common sense. But I think what we can all see from the data is that they're not common practice. And that's actually one of the biggest challenges. If you've got those organizations that aren't operating in such a human way, that they aren't demonstrating empathy, that they aren't really listening and asking for help and encouraging involvement during change, then associates can feel isolated. They feel like change is happening to them. There's a massive lack of trust. There is no way those things aren't impacting your organization financial results. No way. So let's look then at the final thing, because the final thing is about it being trusted. Because at some point, every leadership development conversation ends with a lot of the question that gets posed to you, and that based on the poll earlier, you said you need to keep working on, which is, do we know if these programs are successful? How are we measuring it? High impact development is grounded in science. It's measured through data. It's connecting to those business outcomes. It gives leaders confidence that they're growing, and that gives organizations confidence that they're investing in the right things. So for me, trust comes from consistent evidence. As a leader, a leading head of L&D that I worked with recently said to me, I sort of feel like it's my duty to ensure that leaders are getting value out of this. I don't want to be the person who wastes a leader's time. And so that was that real element of trust. So let's loop back. Do you remember those performance accelerators that I showed you earlier, where you're in a cohort and you're working through a scenario together that you've co-created? What's exciting isn't just that leaders are practicing those critical conversations, that they're receiving feedback, that they're trying again. It's that we can actually measure whether those experiences are translating into better leadership behavior and therefore those operational results. So in this example, we can follow the chain from learner engagement to skill application to behavior change, and ultimately to that operational impact. We saw leaders applying new behaviours more frequently after participating in those programs, but more importantly, those behavioural improvements were so closely connected to the business outcomes that the C-suite really care about, including things like safety and quality, not just revenue. But that to me is the difference of falling into the pitfall that I think a lot of us are falling into at the moment, which is celebrating activity metrics and not celebrating impact metrics. It's one thing for a leader to complete an experience, but I think the real trust from these high impact leadership development experiences is when we can show that real measurable operational impact. I think that's what makes development really trusted, because leaders can see the process and the business trust it because they really see the outcomes. So as we wrap up, let's come back to that challenge we started with. So leaders are being asked to navigate that uncertainty, organizations being put under the pressure to develop that leadership capability quicker than ever. But I think what we can see is that leadership development, we're looking for it being relevant to business outcomes, personalized to individual needs, immersive enough that it's really helping to drive behavior change, human enough that you're hitting the capabilities that matter, and then trusted so that you're demonstrating that impact. So these 5 essentials are the things to take away from today. They solve the very challenges that I know many of you are facing today, either because you've shared with me in advance or because I've seen them in the chat. So this helps you to keep development relevant and scalable, but keep driving that value. We've covered these 5 essentials, but I would like to hear from each of you. I'd love to do another quick poll, thinking about your own organization, your programs today. Where are you all seeing the biggest opportunity? Like, as a community, we're here together right now. Take a moment to vote. There's no right or wrong answer. Each of you are on different journeys, but I'd love to see where you think you can have the greatest impact. Okay, wow, look at this. Okay. This is beautiful, seeing how you're all really reflecting on different aspects. Yeah. Yeah, okay, interesting. So that personalized, yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? That is the thing that I think is so hard to do at scale, because there is just an efficiency. And also we know leaders love learning with other leaders. So you have to pick and choose where are the things. We come back to that comment in the chat about the 70-20-10. It's like, where, you know, that 10% of the formal learning, as long as it's relevant, as long as it could still be immersive and trusted and human, but the personalization, that is hard to achieve as much in the classroom. Some of that might need to come from that 70% back on the job supportive skills. Fantastic. Thank you all so much for engaging in that and sharing where you're at. That also helps us, because I think what we'll probably do based on those results, which is going to be a surprise for some of my team as I share this, but let us pull together some toolkits. Let us do some follow-ups to you and see what you can do to focus on personalized. Maybe we can do a blog series or something on that and really help meet you where you are. So these aren't standalone capabilities, as we've just been talking about. We know these 5 essentials do work really well together. And I mentioned LeaderLab earlier. Before we go to Q&A, I just want to come back to LeaderLab, because what the team, Olivia and members of my team have been so focused on is trying to bring together assessment insights, personalized development, AI-enabled coaching, immersive practice, trying to bring it all into a unified platform, and then making sure that that platform is going to play well with the other friends in your ecosystem, whether it is LMSs, LXPs, whatever it might be, so that it can integrate with the tools, with the reporting, so that you can have that really connected leadership experience while still trying to hit those 5 essentials. So LeaderLab really helps organizations scale the development that is relevant and personalized and immersive and human and trusted, but all in that one place. But I also want to introduce you to one of our other new babies. So I already shared with you about the Performance Accelerator, but I'm really excited to share one of our latest additions, and that is what we are calling DDI Collab. I've got a short video that we are going to share with you about Collab Studio. So we hear that need for personalization, we hear that need for relevance. How do you do it at scale? So what we're offering our organizations that we work with is a bolt-on, which allows them to be able to leverage AI in a very authorized way to customize to their organizations and even to specific leaders. So you can see how there was that organization profile, a leader profile. You can then create a personalization job. We've put all of our content in there, so you just can pull from any of it. And then you can put in a short prompt. Maybe I've only got 15 minutes. So it's got to be a lunch and learn. And it will then take, we've done kind of a hierarchy of the content behind the scenes. So if you've only got 15 minutes, it's not going to try and teach you all 5 key principles. It might just focus, for example, on empathy. Or if it's about influencing, it might just focus on, really understanding the other individual and asking for help and encouraging involvement. So Collab is available soon. It's in fact going to be available in about 10 days time. More broadly, we have got information on the website. We're looking forward to sharing more about that. But to me, this is where we're trying to make it easier for you to implement those 5 essentials. So, of course, that focuses on personalizing and making it relevant. But to me, it's also about that trusted piece. You could go out, you could design leadership development just using AI, but it's a melting pot that it's pulling from. You don't know if it's designed to specific behaviors. Were IO psychologists involved in the background of it? So it helps give you that trusted. Is it going to be measurable afterwards? So we really want to make it easier to deliver learning that is relevant, that is personalized, that is trusted, and really aligned to what success is looking like in your organization. We've covered a lot today, haven't we? But these topics are just too important and frankly too complex to end with a few slides. So I'd really love to dive into some of the questions, hear more about the challenges that you're facing. And I know we've had a bunch of questions come in. And also I know some of you maybe have been struggling to see resources or other places. Don't worry, we will get these to you. We will make sure that they are available. Right, let me dive on into the Q&A and see what we've got going on here. Oh my gosh, we've got a lot of questions. Let me see how many I can get through. So we've got here, what are the new skills leaders will need in order to manage AI as an actual team member and not just as a technology? Yeah, we're seeing the rise of that importance of how organizations are helping leaders to be able to manage what we're calling hybrid teams. So those teams might be actual human leaders, but you might also be leading AI agents. The skills that we're really looking at associated with that, a lot of it is to do with clarity of communication, also aligning performance for success and involving the humans very much in that. What are the skills that we use the agents for? What are the skills that they haven't got the judgment, they haven't got the human, understanding? Or, as I always say about AI will write you a really good mashup. It will do you a really good cover song, but it can't write an original. And most organizations that you're probably working for are trying to be innovative, trying to be original. So yeah, it's being really thoughtful about where you get to that. Let me have a look at some of these others. And Kim, you're going to keep me honest with regards to how long I can keep going here, because I'm going to want to keep hitting all of these.
Verity, you have about 3 minutes.
Okay, let me have a look at some of these top questions that I'm seeing in here. So one of the other questions that I am seeing, hang on a second, is Okay, fantastic. This is a really good one. Yeah, so of those 5 areas, is there one that you would want to try and prioritize? So which of the 5 would you suggest to prioritize? I would say prioritize the one that you voted on towards the end as being most critical. Dive into that, be curious around that. Do you recommend top-down training execs first or bottom-up? I would recommend looking at the leaders who have the closest proximity to the business challenge that your organization is trying to drive. So if they're struggling with execution, you're going to maybe want to even look at the middle managers, or you're going to want to do some analysis of where the execution is falling through. If it's trust, quite often organizations are starting top down. Let me try and squeeze in one more. I'm in a situation where ownership is exploring succession. Yeah, positive change and interim appointments are really struggling. Connection to succession, those 5 essentials will be just as important for succession, especially the personalization one. That is so key, because you're trying in that case to get someone ready for a really specific role. So kind of cookie cutter approaches aren't going to work as much. You'll get some general skills, but if you really want to focus on it, then you are going to need to focus on the personalization and the relevance to their role. Okay, and let me squeeze in one more. The AI scenario generator, does it come with access to the content library? Good question. So that was the performance accelerator. That scenario, the scenarios are coupled to specific content. So it might be focused on coaching, it might be focused on conflict. So that's how those connect. And I think my time is up. Brilliant questions. If we didn't get to your question, we will come back to them. And thank you so much. This has been an absolute blast, and more to come. We'll keep following up on these things.
Thank you, Verity, and thank you, everyone, for a really rich conversation today. A few reminders, as Verity said, if we didn't get to your question, someone will follow up with you and try to get that answered for you. Slides, again, can be found in your resources, and you will receive the link to watch this on demand later today. You will have access to all of the resources in the on-demand view as well. Thank you again, everyone, for your time. And Verity, thank you. And we hope to see you on another DDI webinar. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.